Book 1. The Spark and the Ashes. 5 mages, an adjunct, countless imperial demons, and the debacle that was Darujistan all served to publicly justify the outlawry proclaimed by the Empress on Dujek One-Arm and his battered legions. That this freed One-Arm and his host to launch a new campaign, this time as an independent military force, to fashion his own unholy alliances which were destined to result in a continuation of the dreadful sorcery enfilade on Genebacchus, is, one might argue, incidental. Granted, the countless victims of that devastating time might, should Hood grant them the privilege, voice an entirely different opinion. Perhaps the most poetic detail of what would come to be called the Panion Wars was, in fact, a precursor to the entire campaign. The casual, indifferent destruction of a lone stone bridge by the Jaghut tyrant on his ill-fated march to Darujistan. Imperial Campaigns, the Panion War, 1194 to 1195, Volume 4, Genebacchus. Imragin Talabant, born 1151. Chapter 1. Memories are woven tapestries hiding hard walls. Tell me, my friends, what hue your favoured thread, and I, in turn, will tell the cast of your soul. Life of Dreams, Ilberez the Hag. 1164th year of Burn's sleep, 2 months after the Darujistan fate, 4th year of the Panion Domin, Telan year of the Second Gathering. The bridge's Gadrobi limestone blocks lay scattered, scorched and broken, in the bank's churned mud, as if a god's hand had swept down to shatter the stone span in a single petty gesture of contempt. And that, Gruntle suspected, was but a half-step from the truth. The news had trickled back into Darujistan less than a week after the destruction, as the first eastward-bound caravans this side of the river reached the crossing, to find that where once stood a serviceable bridge was now nothing but rubble. Rumours whispered of an ancient demon unleashed by agents of the Malazan Empire, striding down out of the Gadrobi hills, bent on the annihilation of Darujistan itself. Gruntle spat into the blackened grasses beside the carriage. He had his doubts about that tale. Granted, there'd been strange goings-on the night of the city's fate 2 months back, not that he'd been sober enough to notice much of anything, and sufficient witnesses to give credence to the sightings of dragons, demons, and the terrifying descent of moon spawn. But any conjuring with the power to lay waste to an entire countryside would have reached Darujistan. And, since the city was not a smouldering heap, or no more than was usual after a citywide celebration, clearly nothing did. No, far more likely a god's hand, or possibly an earthquake, though the Gadrobi hills were not known to be restless. Perhaps Burn had shifted uneasy in her eternal sleep. In any case, the truth of things now stood before him, or rather, did not stand, but lay scattered to Hood's Gate and beyond. And the fact remained, whatever games the gods played, it was hard-working dirt-poor bastards like him who suffered for it. The old ford was back in use, 30 paces upriver from where the bridge had been built. It hadn't seen traffic in centuries, and with a week of unseasonal rains, both banks had become a morass. Caravan trains crowded the crossing, the ones on what used to be ramps, and the ones out in the swollen river hopelessly mired down, while dozens more waited on the trails, with the tempers of merchants, guards, and beasts climbing by the hour. 2 days now, waiting to cross, and Gruntle was pleased with his meagre troop. Islands of calm they were. Harlow had waded out to a remnant of the bridge's near-side pile, and now sat atop it, fishing pole in hand. Stony Menakis had led a ragged band of fellow caravan guards to Storby's wagon, and Storby wasn't too displeased to be selling Gredfalan ale by the mug at exorbitant prices. That the ale casks were destined for a wayside inn outside Saltoan was just too bad for the expectant innkeeper. If things continued as they did, there'd be a market growing up here, then a hood-damned town. Eventually, some officious planner in Darujistan would conclude that it'd be a good thing to rebuild the bridge. And in 10 or so years, it would finally get done. Unless, of course, the town had become a going concern, in which case, they'd send a tax collector. Gruntle was equally pleased with his employer's equanimity at the delay. News was, the merchant Manqui on the other side of the river had burst a blood vessel in his head and promptly died, which was more typical of the breed. No, their master Karuli ran against the grain, enough to threaten Gruntle's cherished disgust for merchants in general. Then again, Karuli's list of peculiar traits had led the guard captain to suspect that the man wasn't a merchant at all. Not that it mattered. Coin was coin, and Karuli's rates were good. Better than average, in fact. The man might be Prince Arad in disguise for all Gruntle cared.
You there, sir.
Gruntle pulled his gaze from Harlow's fruitless fishing. A grizzled old man stood beside the carriage, squinting up at him.
Damned imperious of you, that tone,
the caravan captain growled.
Since by the rags you're wearing, you're either the world's worst merchant or a poor man's servant. Manservant, to be precise. My name is Emanciporis. As for my master's being poor, to the contrary, we have, however, been on the road for a long time. I'll accept that, Gruntle said, since your accent is unrecognizable, and coming from me, that's saying a lot. What do you want, Reese?
The manservant scratched the silvery stubble on his lined jaw.
Careful questioning among this mob had gleaned a consensus that, as far as caravan guards go, you're a man who's earned respect. As far as caravan guards go, I might well have it that, Gruntle said dryly. Your point? My masters wish to speak with you, sir. If you're not too busy, we have camped not far from here.
Leaning back on the bench, Gruntle studied Reese for a moment, then grunted.
I'll have to clear with my employer any meetings with other merchants. By all means, sir, and you may assure him that my masters have no wish to entice you away or otherwise compromise your contract. Is that a fact? All right, wait there.
Gruntle swung himself down from the buckboard on the side opposite Reese. He stepped up to the small, ornately framed door and knocked once. It opened softly, and from the relative darkness within the carriage's confines loomed Caruli's round, expressionless face.
Yes, Captain. By all means, go. I admit there's some curiosity about this man's two masters. Be most studious in noting details of your impending encounter, and if you can, determine what precisely they have been up to since yesterday.
The captain grunted to disguise his surprise at Caruli's clearly unnatural depth of knowledge. The man had yet to leave the carriage, then said,
As you wish, sir.
Oh, and retrieve Stony on your way back. She has had far too much to drink and has become most argumentative.
Maybe I should collect her now, then. She's liable to poke someone full of holes with that rapier of hers. I know her moods.
Ah, well, send Harlow, then.
He's liable to join in, sir.
Yet you speak highly of them.
I do, Gruntle replied. Not to be too immodest, sir. The three of us working the same contract are as good as twice that number when it comes to protecting a master and his merchandise. That's why we're so expensive.
Your rates were high. I see. Inform your two companions, then, that an aversion to travel will yield substantial bonuses to their pay.
Gruntle managed to avoid gaping.
That should solve the problem, sir.
Excellent. Inform Harlow thus, then, and send him on his way.
Yes, sir.
The door swung shut. As it turned out, Harlow was already returning to the carriage, fishing pole in one massive hand, a sad sandal sole of a fish clutched in the other. The man's bright blue eyes danced with excitement.
Look, you sour excuse for a man. I've caught supper. Supper for a monastic rat, you mean? I could inhale that damn thing up one nostril.
Harlow scowled.
Fish soup. Flavour.
That's just great. I love mud-flavoured soup. Look, the thing's not even breathing. It was probably dead when you caught it.
I banged a rock between its eyes, Gruntle.
Must have been a small rock.
For that you don't get any.
And for that I bless you. Now listen, Stoney's getting drunk.
Funny. I don't hear no brawl.
Bonuses from Caruli if there isn't one. Understood?
Harlow glanced at the carriage door, then nodded.
I'll let her know.
Better hurry.
Right.
Gruntle watched him scurry off, still carrying his pole and prize. The man's arms were enormous, too long and too muscled for the rest of his scrawny frame. His weapon of choice was a two-handed sword purchased from a weaponsmith in Dead Man's Story. As far as those apish arms were concerned, it might be made of bamboo. Harlow's shock of pale blonde hair rode his pate like a tangled bundle of fishing thread. Strangers laughed upon seeing him for the first time, but Harlow used the flat of a blade to stifle that response. Succinctly. Sighing, Gruntle returned to where Emancipor Reese stood waiting.
Lead on,
he said. Reese's head bobbed.
Excellent.
The carriage was massive, a house perched on high spoked wheels. Ornate carvings crowded the strangely arched frame, tiny painted figures capering and climbing with leering expressions. The driver's perch was canopied in sun-faded canvas. 4 oxen lumbered freely in a makeshift corral, 10 paces downwind from the camp. Privacy obviously mattered to the manservant's masters, since they'd parked well away from both the road and the other merchants, affording them a clear view of the hummocks rising on the south side of the road, and, beyond it, the broad sweep of the plain. A mangy cat lying on the buckboard watched Reese and Gruntle approach.
That your cat?
The captain asked. Reese squinted at it, then sighed.
Aye, sir. Her name's Squirrel. Any alchemist or waxwitch could treat that mange.
The manservant seemed uncomfortable.
I'll be sure to look into it when we get to Saltoan, he muttered. Ah!
He nodded towards the hills beyond the road.
Here comes Master Beauchelin.
Gruntle turned and studied the tall, angular man who had reached the road and now strode casually towards them. Expensive ankle-length cloak of black leather, high-riding boots of the same over grey leggings, and beneath a loose silk shirt, also black, the glint of fine blackened chain armour.
Black, Captain said to Reese, was last year's shade in Derugistan.
Black is Beauchelin's eternal shade, sir.
The master's face was pale, shaped much like a triangle, an impression further accented by a neatly trimmed beard. His hair, slick with oil, was swept back from his high brow. His eyes were flat grey, as colourless as the rest of him, and upon meeting them, Gruntle felt a surge of visceral alarm.
Captain Gruntle,
Beauchelin spoke in a soft, cultured voice.
Your employer's prying is none too subtle, but while we are not ones to generally reward such curiosity regarding our activities, this time we shall make an exception. You shall accompany me.
He glanced at Reese.
Your cat seems to be suffering palpitations. I suggest you comfort the creature.
At once, master.
Gruntle rested his hands on the pommels of his cutlasses, eyes narrowed on Beauchelin. The carriage springs squeaked as the manservant clambered up to the buckboard.
Well, Captain?
Gruntle made no move. Beauchelin raised one thin eyebrow.
I assure you, your employer is eager that you comply with my request. If, however, you are afraid to do so, you might be able to convince him to hold your hand for the duration of this enterprise. Though I warn you, leaving him into the open may prove something of a challenge, even for a man of your bulk.
Ever done any fishing?
Gruntle asked.
Fishing?
The ones that rise to any old bait are young, and they don't get any older. I've been working caravans for more than 20 years, sir. I ain't young. You want to rise? Fish elsewhere.
Beauchelin's smile was dry.
You reassure me, Captain. Shall we proceed?
Lead on.
They crossed the road. An old goat trail led them into the hills. The caravan camp this side of the river was quickly lost to sight. The scorched grass of the conflagration that had struck this land marred every slope and summit, although new green shoots had begun to appear.
Fire,
Beauchelin noted as they walked on,
is essential for the health of these prairie grasses, as is the passage of the Bedouin, the hooves in their hundreds of thousands compacting the thin soil. Alas, the presence of goats will spell the end of verdancy for these ancient hills. But I begin with the subject of fire, did I not? Violence and destruction, both vital for life. Do you find that odd, Captain?
What I find odd, sir, is this feeling that I've left my wax tablet behind.
You've had schooling, then? How interesting. You're a swordsman, are you not? What need you for letters and numbers?
And you're a man of letters and numbers. What need you for that well-worn broadsword at your hip, and that fancy male hauberk?
An unfortunate side effect of education among the masses is lack of respect.
Healthy scepticism, you mean?
Disdain for authority, actually. You may have noted, to answer your question, that we have but a single, rather elderly manservant, no hired guards. The need to protect oneself is vital in our profession.
And what profession is that?
They descended onto a well-trodden path, winding between the hills. Beauchelin paused, smiling as he regarded Gruntle.
You entertain me, Captain. I understand now why you are well spoken of among the caravanserai, since you are unique among them in possessing a functioning brain. Come, we are almost there.
They rounded a battered hillside and came to the edge of a fresh crater. The earth at its base was a swath of churned mud, studded with broken blocks of stone. Gruntle judged the crater to be 40 paces across and 4 or 5 arm lengths in depth. A man sat nearby on the edge of the rim, also dressed in black leather, his bald pate the colour of bleached parchment. He rose silently, for all his considerable size, and turned to them with fluid grace.
Corporal Roach, Captain. My partner. Corporal, we have here Gruntle, a name that is most certainly a slanting hint to his personality.
If Beauchelin had triggered unease in the captain, then this man, his broad, round face, his eyes buried in puffed flesh and wide, full-lipped mouth, set slightly downturned at the corners, a face both childlike and ineffably monstrous, sent ripples of fear through Gruntle. Once again, the sensation was wholly instinctive, as if Beauchelin and his partner exuded an aura somehow tainted.
No wonder the cat had palpitations,
the captain muttered under his breath. He pulled his gaze from Corporal Broach and studied the crater. Beauchelin moved to stand beside him.
Do you understand what you are seeing, Captain?
I'm no fool. It's a hole in the ground.
Amusing. A barrow once stood here. Within it was chained a jackhat tyrant.
Was?
Indeed, a distant empire meddled, or so I gather. And in league with the Talanai Mass, they succeeded in freeing the creature.
You give credence to the tales, then, Gruntle said. If such an event occurred, then what in Hood's name happened to it?
We wondered the same, Captain. We are strangers to this continent. Until recently, we'd never heard of the Malazan Empire, nor the wondrous city called Darujistan. During our all-too-brief stay there, however, we heard stories of events just past. Demons, dragons, assassins. And there's our house named Finist, which cannot be entered yet, seems to be occupied nonetheless. We paid that a visit, of course. More, we'd heard tales of a floating fortress called Moonspawn that once hovered over the city.
Aye, I'd seen that with my own eyes. It left the day before I did.
Beauchelin sighed.
Alas, it appears we have come too late to witness for ourselves these dire wonders. Attester Andy Lord rules Moonspawn, I gather.
Gruntle shrugged.
If you say so. Personally, I dislike gossip.
Finally, the man's eyes hardened. The captain smiled inwardly.
Gossip. Indeed.
This is what you wanted to show me, then? This hole?
Beauchelin raised an eyebrow.
Not precisely. This hole is but the entrance. We intend to visit the Jaghat's tomb that lies below it.
Mopon's blessing to you, then,
Gruntle said, turning away.
I imagine, the man said behind him, that your master would urge you to accompany us.
He can urge all he likes, the captain replied. I wasn't contracted to sink in a pool of mud.
We've no intention of getting covered in mud.
Gruntle glanced back at him, crooked a wry grin.
A figure of speech, Beauchelin. Apologies if you misunderstood.
He swung round again and made his way towards the trail. Then he stopped.
You wanted to see Moonspawn, sirs?
He pointed. Like a towering black cloud, the basalt fortress stood just above the south horizon. Boots crunched on the ragged gravel, and Gruntle found himself standing between the two men, both of whom studied the distant floating mountain.
The scale, Beauchelin muttered, is difficult to determine. How far away is it?
I'd guess a league, maybe more. Trust me, sirs, it's close enough for my tastes. I've walked its shadow in Darujistan. Hard not to for a while there. And believe me, it's not a comforting feeling.
I imagine not. What is it doing here?
Gruntle shrugged.
Seems to be heading southeast.
Hence the tilt.
No, It was damaged over pale, by mages of the Malazan Empire.
Impressive effort, these mages.
They died for it, most of them anyway, so I heard. Besides, while they managed to damage Moonspawn, its lord remains hale. If you want to call kicking a hole in a fence before getting obliterated by the man who owns the house impressive, go right ahead.
Corporal Broach finally spoke, his voice reedy and high-pitched.
Beauchelin, does he sense us?
His companion frowned, eyes still on Moonspawn, then shook his head. I detect no such attention accorded us, friend. But that is a discussion that should await a more private moment.
Very well. You don't want me to kill this caravan guard, then?
Gruntle stepped away in alarm, half drawing his cutlasses.
You'll regret the attempt, he growled.
Be calmed, Captain. Beauchelin smiled. My partner has simple notions.
Simple as an adder's, you mean?
Perhaps. Nonetheless, I assure you, you are perfectly safe. Scowling, Gruntle backed away down the trail.
Master Kiruli, he whispered, if you're watching all this, and I think you are, I trust my bonus will be appropriately generous, and if my advice is worth anything, I suggest we stride clear and wide of these two.
Moments before he moved beyond sight of the crater, he saw Beauchelin and Corporal Broach turn their backs on him, and Moonspawn. They stared down into the hole for a brief span, then began the descent, disappearing from view. Sighing, Gruntle swung about and made his way back to the camp, rolling his shoulders to release the tension that gripped him. As he reached the road, his gaze lifted once more, southward, to find Moonspawn, hazy now with distance.
You there, Lord. I wish you had caught the scent of Beauchelin and Corporal Broach, so you'd do to them what you did to the Jaghut tyrant, assuming you had a hand in that. Preventative medicine, the cutters call it. I only pray we don't all one day come to regret your disinterest.
Walking down the road, he glanced over to see Emancipor Reese, sitting atop the carriage, one hand stroking the ragged cat in his lap.
Mange?
Gruntle considered.
Probably not.
The huge wolf circled the body, head low and turned inward to keep the unconscious mortal within sight of its lone eye. The Warren of Chaos had few visitors. Among those few, mortal humans were rarest of all. The wolf had wandered this violent landscape for a time that was, to it, immeasurable. Alone and lost for so long, its mind had found new shapes born of solitude. The tracks of its thoughts twisted on seemingly random routes. Few would recognize awareness or intelligence in the feral gleam of its eye, yet they existed nonetheless. The wolf circled, massive muscles rippling beneath the dull white fur. Head low and turned inward, lone eye fixed on the prone human. The fierce concentration was efficacious, holding the object of its attention in a state that was timeless, an accidental consequence of the powers the wolf had absorbed within this warren. The wolf recalled little of the other worlds that existed beyond chaos. It knew nothing of the mortals who worshipped it, as they would a god. Yet a certain knowledge had come to it, an instinctive sensitivity that told it of possibilities, of potentials, of choices now available to the wolf with the discovery of this frail mortal. Even so, the creature hesitated. There were risks, and the decision that now gnawed its way to the forefront had the wolf trembling. Its circling spiraled inward, closer, ever closer to the unconscious figure, lone eye fixing finally on the man's face. The gift, the creature saw at last, was a true one. Nothing else could explain what it discovered in the mortal man's face. A mirrored spirit in every detail. This was an opportunity that could not be refused. Still, the wolf hesitated, until an ancient memory rose before its mind's eye, an image, frozen, faded with the erosion of time, sufficient to close the spiral. And then it was done. His single functioning eye blinked open to a pale blue, cloudless sky. The scar tissue covering what was left of his other eye tingled with a maddening itch, as if insects crawled under the skin. He was wearing a helm, the visor raised. Beneath him, hard, sharp rocks dug into his flesh. He lay unmoving, trying to remember what had happened. The vision of a dark tear opening before him. He had plunged into it, was flung into it. A horse vanishing beneath him, the thrum of his bowstring. A sense of unease, which he had shared with his companion. A friend who rode at his side. Captain Parron. Tock the Younger groaned.
Hairlog, that mad puppet! We were ambushed!
The fragments coalesced, memory returning with a surge of fear. He rolled onto his side, every muscle protesting.
Odds breath, this isn't the Rivy Plain.
A field of broken black glass stretched away on all sides. Grey dust hung in motionless clouds, an arm span above it. Off to his left, perhaps 200 paces away, a low mound rose to break the flat monotony of the landscape. His throat felt raw, his eyes stung, the sun was blistering overhead. Coughing, Tock sat up, the obsidian crunching beneath him. He saw his recurved horn bow lying beside him and reached for it. The quiver had been strapped onto the saddle of his horse. Wherever he had gone, his faithful Wiccan mount had not followed. Apart from the knife at his hip and the momentarily useless bow in his hand, then he possessed nothing. No water, no food. A closer examination of his bow deepened his scowl. The gut string had stretched.
Badly, meaning I've been away for some time. Away? Where?
Hairlock had thrown him into a warren. Somehow, time had been lost within it. He was not overly thirsty, nor particularly hungry. But even if he had arrows, the bow's pull was gone. Worse, the string had dried, the wax absorbing obsidian dust. It wouldn't survive retightening. That suggested days, if not weeks, had passed, though his body told him otherwise. He climbed to his feet. The chain armor beneath his tunic protested the movement, shedding glittering dust. Am I within a warren, or has it spat me back out? Either way, he needed to find an end to this lifeless plane of volcanic glass, assuming one existed. He began walking towards the mound. Though it wasn't especially high, he would take any vantage point that was available. As he approached, he saw others like it beyond, regularly spaced. Barrows! Great! I just love barrows! And then a central one, larger than the rest. Tock skirted the first mound, noting in passing that it had been holed, likely by looters. After a moment, he paused, turned, and walked closer. He squatted beside the excavated shaft, peered down into the slanting tunnel. As far as he could see, over a man's height in depth, the mantle of obsidian continued down. For the mounds to have showed at all, they must be huge, more like domes than beehive tombs. Whatever, he muttered. I don't like it. He paused, considering, running through in his mind the events that had led him to this unfortunate situation. The deathly rain of moonspawn seemed to mark some kind of beginning. Fire and pain, the death of an eye, the kiss that left a savagely disfiguring scar on what had been a young, reputedly handsome face. A ride north onto the plain to retrieve adjunct Lorne. A skirmish with Ilgris Bargast. Back in Pale, still more trouble. Lorne had drawn his reins, reviving his old role as a claw courier. Courier? Let's speak plain talk, especially to yourself. You were a spy, but you had been turned. You were a scout in one arms host. That and nothing more, until the adjunct showed up. There had been trouble in Pale. Tattersail, then Captain Parran. Flight and pursuit. What a mess, he muttered. Hairlock's ambush had swatted him like a fly into some kind of malign warren, where I lingered, I think. Good take me. Time's come to start thinking like a soldier again. Get your bearings. Do nothing precipitous. Think about survival, here in this strange, unwelcome place. He resumed his trek to the central barrow. Though gently sloped, it was at least thrice the height of a man. His cough worsened as he scrambled up its side. The effort was rewarded. On the summit, he found himself standing at the hub of a ring of lesser tombs. Directly ahead, 300 paces beyond the ring's edge, yet almost invisible through the haze, rose the bony shoulders of grey-cloaked hills. Closer and to his left were the ruins of a stone tower. The sky behind it glowed a sickly red colour. Tock glanced up at the sun. When he had awoken, it had been at little more than 3/4 of the wheel. Now it stood directly above him. He was able to orientate himself. The hill lay to the northwest, the tower a few points north of due west. His gaze was pulled back to the reddish welt in the sky beyond the tower. Yes, it pulsed, as regular as a heart. He scratched at the scar tissue covering his left eye socket, winced at the answering bloom of colours flooding his mind. That's sorcery over there. God, I'm acquiring a deep hatred of sorcery. A moment later, more immediate details drew his attention. The north slope of the central barrow was marred by a deep pit, its edges ragged and glistening. A tumble of cut stone, still showing the stains of red paint, crowded the base. The crater, he slowly realised, was not the work of looters. Whatever had made it had pushed up from the tomb, violently. In this place, it seems that even the dead do not sleep eternal. A moment of nervousness shook him. Then he shrugged it off with a soft curse. You've known worse, soldier. Remember that Talani mass who joined up with the adjunct? Laconic desiccation on 2 legs, Beru Fendersaw. Hooded eye sockets with not a glimmer or gleam of mercy. That thing had spitted a barghast like a Rivy Plains boar. Eye still studying the crater on the mound's flank, his thoughts remained on Lorne and her undead companion. They'd sought to free such a restless creature, to loose a wild, vicious power upon the land. He wondered if they'd succeeded. The prisoner of the tomb he now stood upon had faced a dreadful task, without question. Wards, solid walls, and armspan after armspan of compacted crushed glass. Well, given the alternatives, I imagine I would have been as desperate and as determined. How long did it take? How malignly twisted the mind once freed? He shivered, the motion triggering another harsh cough. There were mysteries in the world, few of them pleasant. He skirted the pit on his descent and made his way towards the ruins tower. He thought it unlikely that the occupant of the tomb would have lingered long in the area. I would have wanted to get as far away from here and as fast as was humanly possible. There was no telling how much time had passed since the creature's escape, but Tock's scars told him it was years, if not decades. He felt strangely unafraid in any case, despite the inhospitable surroundings and all the secrets beneath the land's ravaged surface. Whatever threat this place had held seemed to be long gone. 40 paces from the tower, he almost stumbled over a corpse. A fine layer of dust had thoroughly disguised its presence, and that dust, now disturbed by Tock's efforts to step clear, rose in a cloud. Cursing, the Malazan spat grit from his mouth. Through the swirling, glittering haze, he saw that the bones belonged to a human. Granted, a squat, heavy-boned one. Sinews had dried nut brown, and the furs and skins partially clothing it had rotted to mere strips. A bone helm sat on the corpse's head, fashioned from the frontal cap of a horned beast. One horn had snapped off some time in the distant past. A dust-sheathed two-handed sword lay nearby.
Speaking of Hood's skull,
Tock the Younger scowled down at the figure.
what are you doing here?
He demanded. Waiting, the Talanai Mas replied, in a leather-rasped voice. Tock searched his memory for the name of this undead warrior.
Onos Tulan,
he said, pleased with himself.
of the Tarad clan.
I am now named Tool, clanless, free.
Free? Tock thought. Free to do precisely what, you sack of bones? Lie around in wastelands? What's happened to the adjunct? Where are we?
Lost.
Which question is that in answer to, Tool?
Both.
Tock gritted his teeth, resisting the temptation to kick the Talanai Mas.
Can you be more specific?
Perhaps.
Well?
Adjunct Lorne died in Darujistan 2 months ago. We are in the ancient place called Morn, 200 leagues to the south. It is just past midday.
Just past midday, you said. Thank you for the enlightenment.
He found little pleasure in conversing with a creature that had existed for hundreds of thousands of years, and that discomfort unleashed his sarcasm. A precarious presumption indeed.
Get back to seriousness, idiot, Tock thought. That flint sword ain't just for show. Did you two free the Jagged tyrant?
Briefly. Imperial efforts to conquer Darujistan failed.
Scowling, Tock crossed his arms.
You said you were waiting. Waiting for what?
She has been away for some time. Now she returns.
Who?
She who has taken occupation of the tower, soldier.
Can you at least stand up when you're talking to me? Before I give in to temptation, Tock thought.
The Talanai Mas rose with an array of creaking complaints, dust cascading from its broad, bestial form. Something glittered for the briefest of moments in the depths of its eye sockets as it stared at Tock. Then Tool turned and retrieved the flint sword.
Gods, bitter I'd insisted he'd just stay lying down, Tock thought. Podge leather skin, taut muscle and heavy bone, all moving about like something alive. Oh, how the Emperor loved them. An army he never had to feed, he never had to transport, an army that could go anywhere and do damn near anything. And no desertions, except for the one standing in front of me right now. How do you punish a Talanai Mas deserter anyway?
I need water, Tock said, after a long moment in which they simply stared at each other.
And food, and I need to find some arrows, and bowstring.
He unstrapped his helmet and pulled it clear. The leather cap beneath it was soaked through with sweat.
Can't we wait in the tower? This heat is baking my brain. And why am I talking as if I expect you to help me, Tool? He thought.
The coast lies 1,000 paces to the southwest, Tool said. Food is available there, and a certain seagrass that will suffice as bowstring until some gut can be found. I do not, alas, smell fresh water. Perhaps the tower's occupant will be generous, though she is less likely to be so if she arrives to find you within it. Arrows can be made. There is a salt marsh nearby, where we can find bone reed. Snares for coast birds will offer us fletching. Arrowheads?
Tool turned to survey the obsidian plain.
I foresee no shortage of raw material.
All right, so help me you will. Thank Hood for that, Tock thought. Well, I hope you can still chip stone and weave seagrass, Talanai Mas, not to mention work bone reed, whatever that is, into true shafts, because I certainly don't know how. When I need arrows, I requisition them, and when they arrive, they're iron-headed and straight as a plumb line.
I have not lost the skill, soldier.
Since the adjunct never properly introduced us, I'm named Tock the Younger, and I'm not a soldier, but a scout.
You are in the employ of the Claw.
With none of the assassin training, nor the majory, besides which, I've more or less pronounced that role. All I seek to do now is to return to one arms host.
A long journey.
So I gathered. The sooner I start, the better then. Tell me, how far does this glass wasteland stretch?
7 leagues. Beyond it, you will find the Lamatath Plain. When you have reached it, set a course north by northeast.
Where will that take me? To Rujistan? Has Dujek besieged the city?
No.
The Talanai Mas swung its head round.
She comes.
Tock followed Tool's gaze. 3 figures had appeared from the south, approaching the edge of the ring of barrows. Of the 3, only the one in the middle walked upright. She was tall, slim, wearing a flowing white tilaba, such as were worn by high-born women of 7 cities. Her black hair was long and straight. Flanking her were 2 dogs, the one on her left as big as a hill pony, shaggy, wolf-like, the other short-haired, dun-coloured, and heavily muscled. Since Tool and Tock stood in the open, it was impossible that they had not been seen, yet the 3 displayed no perturbation or change of pace as they strode nearer. At a dozen paces, the wolfish dog loped forward, tail wagging, as it came up to the Talanai Mas. Musing on the scene, Tock stretched his jaw.
An old friend, Tool? Or does the beast want you to toss it one of your bones?
The undead warrior regarded him in silence.
Humour, Tock said, shrugging, or a poor imitation. I don't think Talanai Mas could take offence. Or rather, I'm hoping that's the case. God's my big mouth, Tock thought.
I was considering, Tool replied slowly. This beast is an eye, and thus has little interest in bones. I prefer flesh, still warm, if possible.
Tock grunted.
I see.
Humour, Tool said after a moment.
Right.
Oh, Maybe this won't be so bad after all. Surprises never cease, Tock thought. The Talane Mas reached out to rest the tips of its bony fingers on the eye's broad head. The animal went perfectly still. An old friend? Yes, we adopted such animals into our tribes. It was that or see them starve. We were, you see, responsible for that starvation. Responsible? As in overhunting? I'd have thought your kind was one with nature. All those spirits, all those rituals of propitiation. Tock the Younger, Tool interrupted. Do you mock me, or your own ignorance? Not even the lichen of the tundra is at peace. All is struggle. All is war for dominance. Those who lose vanish. And we're no different, you're saying? We are, soldier. We possess the privilege of choice, the gift of foresight, though often we come too late in acknowledging those responsibilities. The Talane Mas's head tilted as he studied the eye before him, and, it seemed, his own skeletal hand where it rested upon the beast's head. Baljag awaits your command, dear undead warrior, the woman said upon arriving, her voice a lilting melody. How sweet. Gareth, go join your brother in gracing our desiccated guest. She met Tock's gaze and smiled. Gareth, of course, might decide your companion's worth burying. Wouldn't that be fun? Momentarily, Tock agreed. You speak Daru, yet wear the Talabra of 7 cities. Her brows arched. Do I? Oh, such confusion. Mind you, sir, you speak Daru, yet you are from that repressed woman's empire. What was her name again? Empress Lassine, the Malazan Empire. And how did you know that? I'm not in uniform, Tock thought. She smiled. Indeed. I am Tock the Younger, and the Talane Mas is named Tool. How apt. My, it is hot out here, don't you think? Let us retire within the Jaghut Tower. Gareth, cease sniffing the Talane Mas and awaken the servants. Tock watched the burly dog trot towards the tower. The entrance, the scout now saw, was in fact via a balcony, probably the first floor. Yet another indication of the depth of the crushed glass. That place doesn't appear very habitable, he observed. Appearances deceive, she murmured, once again flashing him a heart-stuttering smile. Have you a name? Tock asked her as they began walking. She is Lady Envy, Tool said, daughter of Draconus, he who forged the sword Dragnipur and was slain by its present wielder, Anamanda Rake, lord of Moonspawn, with that selfsame sword. Draconus had 2 daughters, it is believed, whom he named Envy and Spite. Hood's breath! You can't be serious, Tock muttered. The names no doubt amused him as well. The Talane Mas continued. Really? Lady Envy sighed. Now you've gone and ruined all my fun. Have we met before? No. Nonetheless, you are known to me. So it seems. It was, I admit, over-modest of me to assume that I would not be recognized. After all, I've crossed paths with the Talane Mas more than once. At least twice, that is. Tool regarded her with his depthless gaze. Knowing who you are does not answer the mystery of your present residency here in Morn, should you look to pursue coyness, lady. I would know what you seek in this place. Whatever do you mean? She asked mockingly. As they approached the tower's entrance, a leather-armoured masked figure appeared in the gaping doorway. Tock stopped in his tracks. That's a Segula, he spun to Lady Envy. Your servant's a Segula. Is that what they're called? Her brow wrinkled. A familiar name, though its context escapes me. Ah, well, I have gleaned their personal names, but little else. They happened by and chanced to see me. This one, who is called Senu, and 2 others. They concluded that killing me would break the monotony of their journey. She sighed. Alas, now they serve me. She addressed the Segula. Senu, have your brothers fully awakened? The short, lithe man tilted his head, his dark eyes flat within the slits of his ornate mask. I've gathered, Lady Envy said to Tock. That gesture indicates acquiescence. They are not a loquacious lot, I've found. Tock shook his head, his eyes on the twin broadswords slung under Senu's arms. Is he the only one of the 3 to acknowledge you directly, lady? Now that you mention it. Is that significant? Means he's on the bottom rung in the hierarchy. The other 2 are above conversing with non-Segula. How presumptuous of them. The scout grinned. I've never seen one before, but I've heard plenty. Their homeland is an island south of here, and they're said to be a private lot, disinclined to travel. But they are known of as far north as Nathilog. And who'd take me, aren't they known? He thought. I did sense a certain arrogance that has proved entertaining. Lead us within, dear Senu. The Segula made no move. His eyes had found Tool, and now held steady on the Talane Mas. Hackles rising, the eyes stepped to one side to clear a space between the 2 figures. Senu, Lady Envy inquired, with honeyed politeness. I think, Tock whispered, he's challenging Tool. Ridiculous. Why would he do that? For the Segula, rank is everything. If the hierarchy's in doubt, challenge it. They don't waste time. Lady Envy scowled at Senu. Behave yourself, young man! She waved him into the room beyond. Senu seemed to flinch at the gesture. An itch spasmed across Tock's scar. He scratched it vigorously, breathing a soft curse. The Segula backed into the small room, then hesitated a moment before turning and leading the others to the doorway opposite. A curved hallway brought them to a central chamber in which a tightly wound staircase rose from the centre. The walls were unadorned, roughly pitted pumice. 3 limestone sarcophagi crowded the far end of the room, their lids leaning in a neatly arranged row against the wall behind them. The dog Lady Envy had sent in ahead sat nearby. Just within the entrance was a round wooden table, crowded with fresh fruit, meats, cheese and bread, as well as a beaded clay jug and a collection of cups. Senu's 2 companions stood motionless over the table, as if standing guard and fully prepared to give their lives in its defence. Both were a match to their companions' height and build, and similarly armed. The difference between each was evident only in their masks. Where Senu's enamelled face covering was crowded with dark stained patterns, such decoration diminished successively in the other 2 examples. One was only slightly less marked than Senu's, but the third mask bore naught but twin slashes, one on each gleaming white cheek. The eyes that stared out from the slits of this mask were like chips of obsidian. The twin-scarred Segula stiffened upon seeing the Talan Imas, took 1 step forward.
"Oh, really?"
Lady Envy hissed.
"Challenges are forbidden. Any more of this nonsense, and I shall lose my temper."
All 3 Segula flinched back a step. "There," the woman said. "That's much better." She swung to Tock. "Assuage your needs, young man. The jug contains Salto and white wine, suitably chilled." Tock found himself unable to look away from the Segula wearing the twin-scarred mask. "If a fixed stare represents a challenge," Lady Envy said quietly, "I suggest, for the sake of peace, not to mention your life, that you refrain from your present engagement, Tock the Younger." He grunted in sudden alarm, tore his gaze from the man.
"Good point, lady. It's only that I've never heard of. Well, never mind. Doesn't matter."
He approached the table, reached for the jug. Movement exploded behind him, followed by the sound of a body skidding across the room, striking the wall with a sickly thud. Tock spun round to see Tool, sword upraised, facing the 2 remaining Segula. Senu lay crumpled 10 paces away, either unconscious or dead. His 2 swords were both halfway out of their sheaths. Standing beside Tool, the eye-named Baljag was staring at the body, tail wagging. Lady Envy regarded the other Segula with eyes of ice.
"Given that my commands have proved insufficient, I now leave future encounters in the Talan Imas's obviously capable hands."
She swung to Tool.
"Is Senu dead?"
"No. I used the flat of my blade, lady, having no desire to slay one of your servants." "Considerate of you, given the circumstances."
Tock closed one shaky hand on the jug's handle.
Shall I pour one for you as well, Lady Envy?"
She glanced at him, raised one eyebrow, then smiled.
"A splendid idea, Tock the Younger. Clearly it falls to you and me to establish civility." "What have you learned," Tool said, addressing her, "of the rent?"
Cup in hand, she faced him.
"Ah, you cut to the quick in all matters, I see. It has been bridged by a mortal soul. As I am sure you are aware, the focus of my studies, however, has been on the identity of the warren itself. It is unlike any other. The portal seems almost mechanical."
"Rent? That would be the red welt in the air," Tock thought.
"You have examined the Kachain Chamala tombs, lady?"
She wrinkled her nose.
"Briefly. They are all empty, and have been for some time. Decades."
Tool's head tilted with a soft creak.
"Only decades. Unpleasant detail indeed. I believe the matron experienced considerable difficulty in extricating herself, then spent still further time in recovering from her ordeal, before releasing her children. She and her brood made further efforts in the buried city to the northwest, though incomplete, as the results proved unsatisfactory. They then appear to have departed the area entirely." She paused, then added, "It may be relevant that the matron was the original soul sealing the rent. Another hapless creature resides there now, we must presume."
The Talan Imas nodded. During the exchange, Tock had been busy eating, and was on his 2nd cup of the crisp, cold wine. Trying to make sense of the conversation thus far was giving him a headache. He'd mull on it later. "I need to head north," he said, round a mouthful of grainy bread. "Is there any chance, lady, that you can furnish me with suitable supplies? I would be in your debt." His words trailed away at seeing the avid flash in her eyes.
"Careful what you offer, young man."
"No offence, but why do you call me young man? You look not a day over 25.
"How flattering. Thus, despite Tool's success in identifying me, and I admit that I find the depth of his knowledge most disconcerting, the names the Talan Imas revealed meant little to you."
Tock shrugged.
Manamanda Rake I've heard of course. I didn't know he took a sword from someone else, nor when that event occurred. It strikes me, however, that you may well be justified in feeling some animosity towards him, since he killed your father. What was his name? Draconis. The Malazan Empire shares that dislike. So, in sharing enemies,
we are perforce allies. A reasonable surmise. Unfortunately, wrong. Regardless, I would be pleased to provide what food and drink you are able to carry, though I have nothing in the way of weapons, I'm afraid. In return, I may someday ask of you a favour. Nothing grand, of course. Something small and relatively painless. Is this acceptable?"
Tock felt his appetite draining away. He glanced at Tool, got no help from the undead warrior's expressionless face. The Malazan scowled.
"You have me at a disadvantage, Lady Envy."
She smiled.
And here I was, hoping we'd get past the polite civility to something more intimate. Here you go again, Tock, thinking with the wrong brain.
Her smile broadened. Flushing, he reached for his cup.
Very well, I agree to your proposal. Your equanimity is a delight, Tock the Younger.
He almost choked on his wine.
If I wasn't a sword-kissed one-eyed bastard, I'd be tempted to call that a flirt, he thought.
Tool spoke. Lady Envy, if you seek further knowledge of this rent, you will not find it here. Tock was pleased to see the mild shock on her face as she swung to the Talanai mass.
Indeed. It appears I am not alone in enjoying a certain coyness. Can you explain?
Anticipating the response to that, Tock the Younger grunted, then ducked as he flashed him a dark look. Perhaps, Tool predictably replied.
Ha! I knew it, Tock thought.
An edge came into her tone.
Please do so, then.
I follow an ancient trail, Lady Envy. Morn was but one stop on that trail. It now leads northward. You would find your answers among those I seek.
You wish me to accompany you?
I care not either way, Tool said in his uninflected rasp. Should you choose to stay here, however, I must warn you. Meddling with the rent has its risks, even for one such as you. She crossed her arms.
You think I lack suitable caution?
Even now, you have reached an impasse, and your frustration mounts. I add one more incentive, Lady Envy. Your old travelling companions are converging on the very same destination, the Panyan Domin. Both Anamanda Rake and Caladan Brood prepare to wage war against the Domin. A grave decision. Does that not make you curious?
You are no simple Talanai mass, she accused.
Tool made no reply to that.
He has you at a disadvantage, it seems, Tock said, barely restraining his amusement. I find impertinence disgustingly unattractive, she snapped. Whatever happened to your affable equanimity, Tock the Younger?
He wondered at his sudden impulse to fling himself down at her feet, begging forgiveness. Shrugging the absurd notion off, he said, Badly stung, I think. Her expression softened to something doe-like. The irrational desire returned. Tock scratched his scar, looked away.
I did not intend to sting you.
Right, and the Queen of Dreams has chicken feet, Tock thought.
And I sincerely apologize.
She faced Tool again.
Very well. We shall all of us undertake a journey. How exciting.
She gestured to her Segula servants.
Begin preparations at once.
Tool said to Tock, I shall collect materials for your bow and arrows now. We can complete them on the way. The scout nodded, then added,
I wouldn't mind watching you make them, Tool. Could be useful knowledge.
The Talanai mass seemed to consider, then tilted his head. We found it so. They all turned at a loud grunt from where Senu lay against the wall. He had regained consciousness to find the eye standing over him, the beast licking with obvious pleasure the painted patterns on his mask. The medium, Tool explained in his usual deadpan tone, appears to be a mixture of charcoal, saliva, and human blood.
Now that, Tock muttered, is what I call a rude awakening.
Lady Envy brushed close to him as she moved towards the doorway and cast him a glance as she passed.
Oh, I am looking forward to this outing.
The anything but casual contact slipped a nest of serpents into Tock's gut. Despite his thudding heart, the Malazan was not sure if he should be pleased or terrified. Chapter 2.